AI is breaking the traditional recruiting process by overwhelming recruiters with hundreds of perfect CVs and providing candidates with a cheat code for getting hired. Could long-established science be the solution that we're looking for to defend the integrity of the hiring process? Keep listening to find out. Support for this podcast comes from Greenhouse. Greenhouse is the only hiring software you'll ever need. From outreach to offer, Greenhouse helps companies get measurably better at hiring with smarter, more efficient solutions powered by built-in AI. With Greenhouse AI, you can generate stronger candidate pools faster and source high-quality talent with more precision, streamline the interview process with automation tools, and make faster, more confident hiring decisions with AI-powered reporting. Greenhouse has helped over 7,500 customers across diverse industry verticals from early stage to enterprise become great at hiring, including companies like Airbnb, HubSpot, Lyft, SeatGeek, HelloFresh, and DoorDash. If you're ready to put the power of AI into the hands of your hiring team, you can visit greenhouse.com to learn more.
There's been more of scientific discovery, more of technical advancement and material progress in your lifetime and mine than in all the ages of history.
Hi there, welcome to episode 705 of Recruiting Future with me, Matt Alder. Recruiting Future is a podcast designed to help talent acquisition teams drive measurable impact by developing strategic capability in foresight, influence, talent, and technology. This episode is about talent and technology. Candidates' use of AI is an increasing problem for many employers. Along with dramatically increasing application numbers, AI tools are, in some cases, allowing potentially unsuitable candidates to jump to the front of the queue, endangering the integrity of the recruiting process. One potential answer to this challenge is to deploy science-based psychometric testing much earlier in the process than has traditionally been the case. So, how should assessment tools and technologies evolve to combine scientific robustness, candidate engagement, and resilience against AI manipulation? My guest this week is Alan Bourne, partner at Amanti, and an expert in assessment innovation. Alan highlights the issues with legacy assessment tools and sets out a blueprint for transformation that embraces AI to enhance both the candidate experience and the predictive accuracy of the tools. We also discuss the role of assessment in the move towards skills-based organisations. Hi Alan, and welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, thank you.
An absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Please could you introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do?
Yeah, sure, Matt. Thank you. So I'm Alan Bourne. I'm an organisational psychologist. I was a co-founder at Talent Q and a founder at Sova. So I've been very involved in the product side of assessment over the years. Currently, I'm a partner at Amanti, where I help organisations review and develop their assessment capability.
Fantastic. So you've been working in the assessment space for a very long time. How have you seen things develop particularly over the last few years? And what do you think the key issues are in assessment at the moment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think probably over the last decade, the industry has developed incrementally at being quite a lot better at tailoring to each client's needs. So it used to be very off the shelf prior to that. And as things have become more digitized, it's become better at mapping to sort of different customers' kind of needs, behaviors, competencies, etc., which is great. But meanwhile, it's all still continues to be very questionnaire based or sort of test or form based. There's been a bit of experimentation with things like gamification, but I think assessment still struggles to be engaging and relevant to the job at the same time. And that's been the sort of eternal challenge that hasn't quite been solved. So whilst it's improved, it's still not overcome that. And we either have tools that are very sort of, scientifically driven, but perhaps a bit boring, or whizzy, but it's unclear how well they work. And the big challenge now really is we've got to solve that. And now we've got candidates using AI, and they're arguably winning the arms race in terms of overcoming assessment. So we've got quite a few significant issues to deal with, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk in depth about candidates and AI in a second, but I just suppose something kind of struck me as you were talking there. The assessment as a science has been around for a really long time, and I'm kind of always amazed that it's kind of ignored in a lot of recruiting. You know, people are either ignorant that there's science out there that can predict how well people will do in jobs and things like that, or choose not to use it. I think you touched on some of the reasons there, but what's your kind of view on that? Why is this just not an absolute sort of used every single time?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think there's probably a couple of things there. One of them is the extent to which this sort of assessment industry within the wider talent field has succeeded in getting its message across. And I think it's probably, you know, there'd be parts of the industry that have been in their own ivory tower, let's say, and other things like that. So that there's certainly some of that that's gone on, but also just making it clear what the business benefits are and really articulating it. So there's that side of it. Meanwhile, actually, you know, 90% of the time, people are still using a CV in an interview, which is the least predictive and most unfair way of doing things. So whilst assessment has expanded, it's still got a huge distance to go, I think.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it's kind of crazy that CVs and interviews are still just the norm, really. And I suppose the big thing here is candidates now using AI to apply and kind of effectively breaking the CV and interview process that exists. What are you seeing happening? What do you think the impact is? And do you think companies are really appreciating the significance of what's going on?
I think it's increasingly getting some daylight. I think there's a lot of, it might be a bit unfair, but I think there's a bit of willful sort of ostrich syndrome because it's just it feels to many like too difficult a problem to solve. But yeah, you've got candidates who can, you know, use ChatGPT or another language model, whatever they choose, to firstly sort of script what they're going to say, how to answer interview questions. And there are people doing that in real time in interviews or video interviews. And then also for certain types of test question, whether it's, you know, cognitive or situational questions, those kind of things, anything that's text based or that can be quickly heard by a language model, you can get a piece of AI to help you to say what a good answer is. And so there's a lot of it going on. And the problem you've kind of got is it's a minority of people doing it. There's estimates between maybe 8 and 30%. So let's say if you took 15% as a sort of illustrative number that I've heard from a few places, that minority are doing quite a good job, unfortunately, of leapfrogging past a lot of the other candidates, particularly when it's high volume, like early careers and those kind of things. And the downside of that is if you kind of leapfrog to the front, then it might be 15% of people at the beginning, but that might be, you know, 30% or more actually get hired because they've all jumped to the front of the queue. So it raises a lot of questions about the integrity of the process, of actually of the candidates as well, and the risk of making poor hires. So, you know, it's been in, you know, Bloomberg and the BBC and et cetera have covered the story, but it hasn't quite, I don't think, really penetrated practice yet.
Yeah, and I think people tend to look at kind of overall numbers, you know, have their application numbers gone up rather than sort of digging into, well, what's actually happening within those numbers as well.
Yes, exactly. And you know, to your point, I think there was a Institute for Student Employers stat from looking at the last year that said applications have gone up 59%. Now, some of that is believed to be due to people using AI to do their applications, which you can understand. The issue that follows is if you've then when you assess them, have asked them not to use AI, and some of the people are, that's when it starts to get pretty messy. And I don't, you know, people do things like look at what the average scores are, but that can hide quite a lot of sins. So we need more precise ways of understanding what's going on and ways of mitigating it, I think.
And how can assessments solve that problem? What do you think the way forward with it is?
I think the challenge fundamentally is actually about the format of questions and therefore how sort of vulnerable they are to this process. There's nothing wildly advanced about how people are using AI here. It's you basically copy and pasting or taking an image. So it's very straightforward. There's a definitive way of handling that, which is, you know, which people call proctoring, you know, where you're videoed or monitored what you're doing on your computer while you're doing an assessment. And that there's obviously some mileage in that to try and defend the process when it's happening. And there's also the idea you might use AI to detect forensically when people are doing this. But I think it's not clear that that's super effective yet. So there's sort of the defensive bit. That's fine. But that still leaves us with the issue I mentioned earlier of assessment still not being particularly exciting. So the opportunity you've got a bit more proactively is, can we use AI to look at redoing how we do assessment in the first place? Can we make it much more immersive and engaging, maybe a lot more simulation based, so that the actual experience is a kind of real-time experience of doing the task or speaking to a customer or communicating in a boardroom, whatever it might be, where it's much more immersive and you can't really, in real time, get an AI to do that for you. You just have to be in the moment and do it. So I think there's a real win-win there if we, instead of being defensive, treat it a bit more positively.
And I suppose that comes back to your earlier point about science and technology and everything like that, because we're seeing a lot of AI recruiting solutions coming onto the market that potentially also offer sort of degrees of assessment and those kind of things. And then, as you say, some of the more traditional assessments are sort of very question-based and sort of very dull. What's the right balance between science and technology in this kind of just incredibly disruptive time?
Well, I think that's a very, very good question. I think that the fundamental bit there is it's not an either or, which actually then makes it, an interesting challenge to solve. So, yes, you want the science piece to be clear, particularly around precision of predicting who's a good hire. And secondly, also importantly, fairness in terms of how that's done. So that's the measurable part of, is it working? That's absolutely essential. And that should be table stakes. So anything that doesn't demonstrate that, don't touch it. But then alongside that, clearly having a seamless and in a engaging candidate experience is really important. I think there's lots that's been talked about candidate experience for the last 10, 20 years. Maybe not quite so much has actually happened. So the sweet spot is, how do we solve for getting both of those things right at the same time? And if you just have whizzy candidate experience but make terrible hires, clearly that's not a great idea. Equally, we don't want to sort of be stuck in the past in how we're doing it. So that's the challenge, really. You need to have both.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that, you're kind of warning there about some of the technology that's out there that's reinventing recruitment, but not any attention to the actual science of this is kind of really important, because I think that's a trap that lots of people could potentially fall into.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And I think it's this is the case in all areas where AI is appearing. But if you think of many other areas, like healthcare is a great example. Clearly, you want to know that any AI that's being used for diagnostics is really good at doing the diagnostics and doesn't get it wrong, right? Hiring is not as life and death in that, but you still need to get it right, and there's legal reasons you need to get it right as well. So it's incumbent on employers to sort of buy solutions or build solutions that meet that criteria, I think.
One of the other big areas that I'm seeing assessment talked about is within the whole kind of the move towards skill-based thinking, skill-based organizations, skills-based hiring, all those kind of things. Do you think employers have got the right approach to that? Are they getting it right? How do you kind of see that kind of part of the market?
Some of the conversations that I've had with employers around this, I think, show that they're very willing to want to make a go of skills-based hiring, skills-based organizations, and they want to do that. Sometimes they feel like they've been told to do it from higher up in the organization, which isn't always the best place to start. But I think most people buy into the underlying philosophy of, let's look objectively at people's skills and then use that to work out what roles they can do and make the best of their potential and all of that. I think the concept bit feels like there's quite a lot of engagement. But it's one of those pieces where we sort of sold the concept too early without actually the industry having got enough solutions to deliver it. It's my sense. And there's still a lot of people going, well, we want to be skills-based. How do we actually do it? And you end up with, a lot of firms have competency frameworks and behavior frameworks of one kind or another, which are very broad, and skills needs to be much more discrete. So that all needs a rework. And also they've got knowledge-based, hard skills and then behavioral skills. And you kind of need to bring all of this together coherently if you're then going to kind of create the talent intelligence approach that I think most people are aspiring to. So that, I sense there's quite a big execution gap between buying into the concept, but not quite knowing how to do it. And I'm not sure there's there's not yet a sort of silver bullet solution to that, nor may there ever be. So we've got to do quite a lot more work to help, I think.
And I think part of that as well is people kind of understanding perhaps what is even meant by skills in the first place, because I've seen a lot of dialogue around skills-based hiring that kind of reduces it to those kind of hard skills. It's like, or we're going to ignore where someone went to university and where they've worked before. We're going to look at these very kind of short-term hard skills they've got. That's not really the right way to think about it, is it?
No, I think there's a real risk there that you kind of replace experience-based CVs with experience-based ways of looking at skills, which doesn't really solve the problem. I think you want to measure what people can actually do, not what they say they can do or where they've been before, all those kind of things, right? So, and I think that's possibly the sort of gap. There's a bit of a trap there that happens where you end up just sort of defaulting to what feels easy, and that isn't going to make life wildly better than it is at the moment. Yeah, there's lots of issues with bias and poor definition of requirements now, but you're not going to improve it if you just go down the route you're describing. I think we've got to stand back a wee bit and go, right, what's a more holistic view of the behaviours, skills, kind of power skills, as they're called, underlying enablers that make people perform well, and have frameworks with all of those things in. I think that's essential to make it work. And then if you don't have technology to then sort of see that data and have assessment data that proves that people have the skills rather than they just say they've got them, you've got to solve all of those problems to make this work, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I think that's a big point there, because I've seen a lot of kind of activity in this area that's using kind of self-reporting to try and assess the skills in the business. And I remember talking to a number of organizations actually when I was doing some research around this last year, and they were saying people were just sort of writing in people skills generically as the most popular skill that they had without kind of breaking that down any further.
And there are sort of fairly predictable demographic differences, from a sort of gender perspective and in, socioeconomic background around the extent to which people articulate what they can do and either inflate it or not. If you rely on self-report on skills, it's not any better than self-report on anything else, right? You'll end up with the same people saying they're brilliant, and that doesn't really give you objective data.
So tie this all together for us. What does the future look like? What do you think the world of assessment and recruiting and TA might be like in a few years' time, when the technology, and we can see it coming, has kind of sort of finally caught up with where we'd like it to be?
Yes, well, I think my take would be that if you think about the different technologies that would be relevant to really improving in this area, when people talk about AI, they're just thinking about language models, and actually AI is quite a lot broader than that. So you've got, live personas that, bring characters to life, and you've got obviously all the sort of voice in and out capabilities and all of the different things here, as well as analytical usage of AI. So there's a few different strands to it. But when you bring that together, I think the actual technology is just about mature now to really change how assessment looks and works. So I don't think the problem now is the technology. I think the problem is our, kind of capacity to grab hold of it and use it and start innovating a bit more boldly than we have done. So, there's lots of work to be done on the science side, of course, as I was inferring earlier. But I think the tech isn't now the barrier. It's now with us to grab hold of it and move it forward. And I think that in terms of what that looks like, I really see creating more task-based simulations in some of that might be sort of practical tasks, but also interactive tasks with different personas of, dealing with a customer or, managing a project team or whatever the particular scenarios are relevant to the job. I think the capacity to do that, is going to be the next opportunity for the industry. And it's just a case of getting on with it now.
100%. Alan, thank you very much for talking to me.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
My thanks to Alan. You can follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can search all the past episodes at recruitingfuture.com. On that site, you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter, Recruiting Future Feast, and get the inside track on everything that's coming up on the show. Thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next time, and I hope you'll join me.